Hello and welcome to MBKM Models. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe and follow for more great aircraft documentaries and model build videos. The Douglas DC-1 was the first model of the famous American DC Douglas commercial transport aircraft series. Although only one example of the DC-1 was produced, the design was the basis for the DC-2 and DC-3, the latter being one of the most successful aircraft in the history of aviation. Development of the DC-1 can be traced back to the 1931 crash of a TWA Airliner, a Fokker F-10 trimotor, in which a wing fell, probably because water had seeped between the layers of the wood laminate and dissolved the glue holding the layers together. Following the accident, the aeronautics branch of the US Department of Commerce placed stringent restrictions on the use of wooden wings on passenger airliners. Boeing developed an answer, the 247, a twin-engine all-metal monoplane with a retractable undercarriage, but their production capacity was reserved to meet the needs of United Airlines, part of United Aircraft and Transport Corporation, which also owned Boeing. TWA needed a similar aircraft to respond to competition from the Boeing 247, and they asked 5 manufacturers to bid for construction of a 3-engine 12-seat aircraft of all-metal construction capable of flying 1,080 miles at 150 miles per hour. The most demanding part of the specification was that the airliner would have to be capable of safely taking off from any airport on TWA's main routes, and in particular Albuquerque, at high altitude and with severe summer temperatures, with one engine non-functioning. Donald Douglas was initially reluctant to participate in the invitation from TWA. He doubted that there would be a market for 100 aircraft, the number of sales necessary to cover development costs. Nevertheless, he submitted a design consisting of an all-metal low-wing twin-engined aircraft seating 12 passengers, a crew of 2 and a flight attendant. The aircraft exceeded the specifications of TWA even with only 2 engines, principally through the use of controllable pitch propellers. It was insulated against noise, heated and fully capable of both flying and performing a controlled takeoff or landing on one engine. Donald Douglas stated in a 1935 article on the DC-2 that the first DC-1 cost $325,000 to design and build. Only one aircraft was produced. The prototype made its maiden flight on July the 1st, 1933. Flown by Carl Cover, it was given the model name DC-1 or Douglas Commercial Model 1. During a half year of testing, it performed more than 200 test flights and demonstrated its superiority over the most used airliners at that time, the Ford Trimotor and Fokker Trimotor. It was flown across the United States on February the 19th, 1934, making the journey in the record time of 13 hours and 5 minutes. TWA accepted the aircraft on the 15th of September 1933, with a few modifications, mainly increasing seating to 14 passengers and adding more powerful engines, and subsequently ordered 20 examples of the developed production model, which was named the Douglas DC-2. The DC-1 was sold to Lord Forbes in the United Kingdom in May 1938, who operated it for a few months before selling it in France in October 1938. It was then sold to LAPE in Spain in November 1938 and was also used by the Spanish Republican Air Force as a transport aircraft. It was later operated by Iberia Airlines from July 1939. It force landed at Malaga in Spain on October the 4th, 1940 and was damaged beyond repair. The Douglas DC-2 is a 14-passenger twin-engine airliner that was produced by the American company Douglas Aircraft Company, starting in 1934. It competed with the Boeing 247. In 1935, Douglas produced a larger version called the DC-3, which became one of the most successful aircraft in history. In the early 1930s, fears about the safety of wooden aircraft structures drove the US aviation industry to develop all-metal airliners. United Airlines had the exclusive right to the all-metal twin-engine Boeing 247. Rival TWA issued a specification for an all-metal trimotor. The Douglas response was more radical when it flew on July the 1st, 1933 DC-3, the prototype DC-1 had a robust tapered wing, retractable landing gear, and two 690 horsepower, 515 kilowatt Wright radial engines, driving variable pitch propellers. It seated 12 passengers. Douglas test pilot Carl Cover flew the first test flight on May the 11th, 1934, of the DC-2, which was longer than the DC-1, had more powerful engines, and carried 14 passengers in a 66-inch wide cabin. TWA was the launch customer for the DC-2, ordering 20. The design impressed American and European airlines, and further orders followed. Although Fokker had purchased a production license from Douglas for $100,000, around $2 million in modern terms, no manufacturing was done in the Netherlands. Those for European customers, KLM, LOT, Swissair, CLS and LAPE, purchased by the way of Fokker in the Netherlands, were built and flown by Douglas in the US, sea shipped to Europe with wings and propellers detached, then erected at airfields by Fokker near the seaport of arrival, for example Cherbourg or Rotterdam. Airspeed Limited took a similar license for DC-2s to be delivered in Britain and assigned the company designation Airspeed AS-23, but although a registration for one aircraft was reserved, none were built. Another license was taken by the Nakajima Aircraft Company in Japan. Unlike Fokker and Airspeed, Nakajima built 5 aircraft as well as assembling at least one Douglas-built aircraft. A total of 130 civil DC-2s were built, with another 62 for the United States military. In 1935, Donald Douglas stated in an article that the DC-2 cost about $80,000, around $2 million in modern terms per aircraft if mass-produced. Although overshadowed by its ubiquitous successor, it was the DC-2 that showed that passenger air travel could be comfortable, safe and reliable. As a token of this, KLM entered its first DC-2 PHAJU store in the October 1934 McRobertson Air Race between London and Melbourne. Out of the 20 entrants, it finished second behind the purpose-built de Havilland DH-88 racer. Grosvenor House race time 70 hours 54 minutes and nearly 3 hours ahead of the Boeing 247D. During the total journey time of 90 hours 13 minutes, it was in the air for 81 hours 10 minutes. It won the handicap section of the race, as although the DH-88 had finished in the handicap section, the regulations allowed the crew to claim only one victory. It flew KLM's regular 9,000-mile route, 1,000 miles longer than the official race route, carrying mail, making every scheduled passenger stop, turning back once to pick up a stranded passenger, and even became lost in a thunderstorm and briefly stuck in the mud after a diversionary landing at the Albury racecourse on the last leg of the journey. The Douglas DC-3 is a propeller-driven airliner manufactured by the Douglas Aircraft Company, which had a lasting effect on the airline industry in the 1930s to 1940s and World War II. It was developed as a larger, improved 14-bed sleeper version of the Douglas DC-2. It is a low-wing metal monoplane with conventional landing gear, powered by 2 radial piston engines of 1,000 to 1,200 horsepower, 750 to 890 kilowatts. Although the DC-3s, originally built for civil service, had the Wright R1820 Cyclone, later civilian DC-3s used the Pratt & Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp engine. The DC-3 has a cruising speed of 207 miles per hour, a capacity of 21 to 32 passengers or 6,000 pounds of cargo, and a range of 1,500 miles and can operate from short runways. The DC-3 had many exceptional qualities compared to previous aircraft. It was fast, had a good range, was more reliable, and carried passengers in greater comfort. Before the war, it pioneered many air travel routes. It was able to cross the continental United States from New York to Los Angeles in 18 hours, with only 3 stops. It is one of the first airliners that could profitably carry only passengers without relying on mail subsidies. Following the war, the airliner market was flooded with surplus transport aircraft, and the DC-3 was no longer competitive due to its inadequate size and slow speed. It was made obsolete on main routes routes by more advanced types such as the Douglas DC-4 and Lockheed Constellation, but the design proved adaptable and useful on less commercially demanding routes. Civilian DC-3 production ended in 1943 at 607 aircraft. Military versions, including the C-47 Skytrain, the Dakota in British RAF service, and Soviet and Japanese built versions, brought total production to over 16,000. Many continue to be used in a variety of niche roles. 2,000 DC-3s and military derivatives were estimated to be still flying in 2013. By 2017, more than 300 were still flying. As of 2023, it is estimated about 150 are still flying. DC stands for Douglas Commercial. The DC-3 was the culmination of a development effort that began after an inquiry from Transcontinental and Western Airlines, TWA, to Donald Douglas. TWA's rival in transcontinental air service, United Airlines, was starting service with the Boeing 247, and Boeing refused to sell any 247s to other airlines until United's order for 60 aircraft had been filled. TWA asked Douglas to design and build an aircraft that would allow TWA to compete with United. The Douglas design, the 1933 DC-1, was promising and led to the DC-2 in 1934. The DC-2 was a success, but with room for improvement. The DC-3 resulted from a marathon telephone call from American Airlines Chief Executive Officer C.R. Smith to Donald Douglas, when Smith persuaded a reluctant Douglas to design a sleeper aircraft based on the DC-2 to replace American's Curtiss Condor II biplanes. The DC-2's cabin was 66 inches wide, too narrow for side-by-side berths. Douglas agreed to go ahead with development only after Smith informed him of American's intention to purchase 20 aircraft. The new aircraft was engineered by a team led by Chief Engineer Arthur E. Raymond over the next 2 years, and the prototype DST, Douglas Sleeper Transport, first flew on December 17, 1935, the 32nd anniversary of the Wright brothers' flight at Kitty Hawk, with Douglas Chief Test Pilot Carl Cover at the controls. Its cabin was 92 inches wide, and a version with 21 seats instead of the 14 to 16 sleeping berths of the DST was given the designation DC-3. No prototype was built, and the first DC-3 built followed 7 DSTs off the production line for delivery to American Airlines. The DC-3 and DST popularized air travel in the United States. Eastbound transcontinental flights could cross the US in about 15 hours, with 3 refueling stops, while westbound trips against the wind took 17.5 hours. A few years earlier, such a trip entailed short hops in slower and shorter range aircraft during the day, coupled with train travel overnight. Several radial engines were offered for the DC-3. Early production civilian aircraft used either the 9-cylinder Wright R1820 Cyclone 9 or the 14-cylinder Pratt & Whitney R1830 Twin Wasp, but the Twin Wasp was chosen for most military versions and was also used by most DC-3s converted from military service. 5 DC-3 Super DC-3s with Pratt & Whitney R2000 Twin Wasps were built in the late 1940s, 3 of which entered airline service. Total production, including all military variants, was 16,079. More than 400 remained in commercial service in 1998. Production was 607 civilian variants, 10,048 military C-47 and C-53 derivatives built at Santa Monica, California, Long Beach, California, and Oklahoma City. 4,937 built under license in the Soviet Union from 1939 to 1950 as the Lusinov Li-2, NATO reporting name cab. 487 Mitsubishi Kinsei engine aircraft built by Showa and Nakajima in Japan from 1939 to 1945 as the L2D Type O transport, Allied codename Tubby. Production of the DSTs ended in mid-1941 and civilian DC-3 production ended in early 1943, although dozens of the DSTs and DS-3s ordered by airlines that were produced between 1941 and 1943 were pressed into US military service while still on the production line. Military versions were produced until the end of the war in 1945. A larger, more powerful Super DC-3 was launched in 1949 to positive reviews. The civilian market was flooded with second-hand C-47s, many of which were converted to passenger and cargo versions. Only 5 Super DC-3s were built and 3 of them were delivered for commercial use. The prototype Super DC-3 served the US Navy with the designation YC-129 alongside 100 R4Ds that had been upgraded to the Super DC-3 specifications. From the early 1950s, some DC-3s were modified to use Rolls-Royce Dart engines, as in the Conroy Turbo 3. Other conversions featured Armstrong Siddeley Mamba or Pratt & Whitney PT-6A turbines. The Greenwich Aircraft Corporation DC-3TP is a conversion with an extended fuselage and with Pratt & Whitney Canada PT-6A 65AR or PT-6A 67R engines fitted. The Basler BT-67 is a conversion of the DC-3 C-47. Basler refurbishes C-47s and DC-3s at Wisconsin in the United States of America, fitting them with Pratt & Whitney Canada PT-6A 67R turboprop engines, lengthening the fuselage by 40 inches with a fuselage plug ahead of the wing, and some local strengthening of the airframe. South Africa-based Braddock Specialised Air Services, internationally commonly referred to as BSAS, has also performed Pratt & Whitney PT-6 turboprop conversions, having performed modifications on over 50 DC-3s, C-47s, 65 ARTPs, 67 RTPs and 67 FTPs. American Airlines inaugurated passenger service on June 26, 1936, with simultaneous flights from Newark, New Jersey and Chicago, Illinois. Early US airlines like American, United, TWA, Eastern and Delta ordered over 400 DC-3s. These fleets paved the way for the modern American air travel industry, which eventually replaced trains as the favoured means of long-distance travel across the United States. A non-profit group, Flagship Detroit Foundation, continues to operate the only original American Airlines flagship DC-3 with airshow and airport visits throughout the US. In 1936, KLM Royal Dutch Airlines received its first DC-3, which replaced the DC-2 in service from Amsterdam by way of Batavia, now Jakarta, to Sydney, by far the world's longest scheduled route at the time. In total, KLM bought 23 DC-3s before the war broke out in Europe. In 1941, a China National Aviation Corporation CNAC DC-3 pressed into wartime transportation service was bombed on the ground at Sufu Airfield in China, destroying the outright wing. The only spare available was that of a smaller Douglas DC-2 in CNAC's workshops. The DC-2's right wing was removed, flowed to Sufu under the belly of another CNAC DC-3 and bolted up to the damaged aircraft. After a single test flight in which it was discovered that it pulled to the right due to the difference in wing sizes, the so-called DC-2.5 was flown to safety. During World War II, many civilian DC-3s were drafted for the war effort, and more than 10,000 US military versions of the DC-3 were built under the designations C-47, C-53, R-4D and Dakota. Peak production was reached in 1944 with 4 4,853 being delivered. The armed forces of many countries use the DC-3 and its military variants for the transport of troops, cargo and wounded. Licensed copies of the DC-3 were built in Japan as the L2D and in the Soviet Union as the Lusanov Li-2. After the war, thousands of cheap ex-military DC-3s became available for civilian use. Cubana de Aviación became the first Latin American airline to offer a scheduled service to Miami when it started its first scheduled international service from Havana in 1945 with a DC-3. Cubana used DC-3s on some domestic routes well into the 1960s. Douglas developed an improved version, the Super DC-3, with more power, greater cargo capacity and an improved wing. But with inexpensive surplus aircraft available, they failed to sell well in the civilian aviation market. Only 5 were delivered, 3 of them to Capital Airlines. The US Navy had 100 of its early R4Ds converted to Super DC-3 standard during the early 1950s as the Douglas R4D 8C-117D. The last US Navy C-117 was retired on July the 12th, 1976. The last US Marine Corps C-117, serial 50835, was retired from active service during June 1982. Several remained in service with small airlines in North and South America in 2006. The United States Forest Service used the DC-3 for smoke jumping and general transportation until the last example was retired in December 2015. A number of aircraft companies attempted to design a DC-3 replacement over the next 3 decades, including the very successful Fokker F-27 Friendship, but no single type could match the versatility, rugged reliability and economy of the DC-3. While newer airliners soon replaced it on longer, high-capacity routes, it remained a significant part of air transport systems well into the 1970s as a regional airliner before being replaced by early regional jets. Perhaps unique among pre-war aircraft, the DC-3 continues to fly in active commercial and military service as of 2021, 86 years after the type's first flight in 1935. Although the number is dwindling due to expensive maintenance and a lack of spare parts, there are small operators with DC-3s in revenue service and as cargo aircraft. Applications of the DC-3 have included passenger service, aerial spraying, freight transport, military transport, missionary flying, skydiver shuttling and sightseeing. There have been a very large number of civil and military operators of the DC-3, C-47 and related types. A common saying among aviation enthusiasts and pilots is the only replacement for a DC-3 is another DC-3. Its ability to use grass or dirt runways makes it popular in developing countries or remote areas where runways may be unpaved. The oldest surviving DST is N133D, the 6th Douglas sleeper transport built, manufactured in 1936. This aircraft was delivered to American Airlines on the 12th of July 1936 as NC-16005. In 2011 it was at Shell Creek Airport, Punta Gorda, Florida. It has been repaired and has been flying again. The most recent flight was on the 25th of April 2021. The oldest DC-3 still flying is the original American Airlines flagship Detroit, the 43rd aircraft off the Santa Monica production line that was delivered on the 2nd of March 1937, which appears at air shows around the United States and is owned and operated by the flagship Detroit Foundation. The base price for a new DC-3 in 1936 was around $60,000 to $80,000, and by 1960 used examples were available for $75,000. In 2023, flying examples can be bought from $400,000 to $700,000. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and until next time.